Well, Kirby Smart's talked about it a lot this week, and now that we're right on top of the game, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the sound and crowd at Auburn. And folks, I don't know if they have a total appreciation of how difficult it is to play at Auburn. And when you go around the league, I've been doing this for more than 20 years. Auburn certainly stands out as a place that's very difficult to play. I do think we say this a lot about a lot of places. If you'll bear with me for a second, I'll go through the list of places Georgia plays a lot. They never play at the Swamp, so I wouldn't really be qualified to talk about the Swamp. Vanderbilt, I don't think it's a tough place to play. But once you start talking about Auburn and Tennessee, which are both places where Georgia is certainly in the minority in terms of fans, and then to some degree Kentucky for sure. You go up to Commonwealth at night, that is a snake pit. So you don't want any part of those places. I think with Georgia Tech, obviously more than half the crowd or somewhere around half the crowd are Georgia fans anyway. So that's when you go to Auburn and it becomes even more obvious how hard it is to play there. It's not a huge stadium by SEC standards. I mean, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, Texas A&M, they're all bigger than Auburn. But Auburn does a good job of either piping in sound, like Tennessee definitely does that, or of just creating their own sound. I think, frankly, it's their student section does a great job of getting really amped up for games like Georgia and Alabama, and it will be a challenge for Georgia. And anyone who thinks that it won't be is not really being honest about the situation. You're talking about either JT or Stetson, whoever starts, probably Stetson, I guess. At this point, none of us really have the first idea. But Stetson's never started in a road environment with, call it 70,000 fans against him. That's just not something he's ever dealt with. He's played at Alabama, which I do think would prepare you for this situation. But you can't compare playing like at Missouri or like JT did a season ago, or at Carolina with 20,000 fans. It's just not the same as Auburn. And the rivalry adds to that a lot. And when you think about the 2007 game in Athens, the 2014 game in Athens, even the 2016 game in Athens, these rivalry games, Georgia only has 3 rivals. They have Auburn, Tech, and Florida. Do not try to correct me, okay? I'm not going through what is fact. Okay, Tennessee is not a rival. It's a big game. Clemson is not a rival. It's a big game. South Carolina is not a rival. It's a big game. Alabama is not a rival. It's a big game. Let's stay focused on what's real here, which is, those rivalry games in particular. There's not much like Auburn in Athens, and the only thing that compares to Georgia being at Auburn is LSU at Auburn and then Bama at Auburn. So you don't see these games a lot, and the fans get really whipped up. For years, this game was, Auburn would only get one of the two. They'd either get Alabama or Georgia to close the season. So it was really their most important game of the year. Now with the shift in the schedule for TV and the fact that Georgia and Alabama play at Auburn every single season or away every single season, it takes away from it a little bit, but it's still a huge game. I mean, these two teams played 100 times 25 years ago. This will be the 127th game because of the SEC championship game in 2017. They played twice in 1 year. Now, someone can correct me on that because that could be off, but I don't think it is. And, when you talk about a rivalry where it is the second most played rivalry in major college football behind Minnesota and Wisconsin, and it will probably pass that because Auburn and Georgia can play in the future in the SEC championship game like they did in 17, like they could play in theory in future in the playoff. Well, I don't think we're going to have Wisconsin and Minnesota playing in that thing. So it really amps up one of the great rivalries in college sports and sports generally speaking. I think it's a massively undervalued rivalry in the grand scheme of things. Think about it like this. USC and UCLA don't draw the amount of television eyeballs that Auburn and Georgia do. It's it's not Georgia, Florida, and it's not the Iron Bowl, but it's like right there, and it's consistently. Well, I say right there. It is. It is just underneath those. I mean, the Iron Bowl. There's very few things beyond Ohio State and Michigan that compare to that in terms of, just bang for your buck in terms of audience. But Auburn, Georgia, for so long has determined, in many decades, determined the Southeastern Conference champion who would go to the Sugar Bowl, 1980, 1982, 1983. Before there was an SEC championship game, this game determined it in the 50s with Fran Tarkington. That was the last time Georgia won the SEC championship in Athens. So it's a game that means so much for so many people. And when they say, oh, well, why is it so loud? Well, that's definitely one reason. But I think it's going to be challenging for Georgia to function offensively at the line of scrimmage if they're down in the game or if it's close late. So Georgia has nearly outscored its opponents. I mean, just with the exception of the Clemson game, they've all been blowouts in the first quarter. And, Jonathan Branch reached out to me last night and said that if Georgia scores first in this game, they will have scored at least 100 points in a row on their opponents. 100 points in a row in football or in any sport. But in football, that's nuts. So they have not really been challenged in the first quarter outside of the Clemson game and a little bit of the South Carolina game, although I think that's kind of pushing it. So I expect a rejuvenated Jordan-Hare, and I want to pronounce it right because I don't need people jumping off a cliff. And I expect a rejuvenated stadium of fans who still think they can win the league. I mean, their only loss is to Penn State on the road. So everything's in front of Auburn still. And I always do that because it's true. It is all in front of Auburn still. But you can't ignore what we've seen these last 2 weeks, which are just not been very good football from Auburn. And we've seen 5 straight weeks of very good to dominant football from Georgia. So, and I don't want to hear about upsets, okay? That was in the 90s or maybe in the 80s. 1986, 1996 was an upset. 1997 was an upset. 1999 was an upset. But kind of after that, we hadn't seen a lot of upsets. Not major upsets. That just doesn't really happen in this series anymore. So, and let's be honest, these two teams were adequate in the 90s. They weren't major players on the national stage. I mean, in 2017, Auburn beat the two teams playing in the national championship game. In 2013, Auburn played for a national championship. In 2004, Auburn went undefeated and should have played in the national championship game. That's not what was going on in the 90s. You had 1993 with Auburn being undefeated, but on probation, couldn't do anything. It's just a different time for both of these teams. And, for Auburn right now, you've got a lot of, Bama and Georgia's shadow over the top of them. And that's something that they really are annoyed by, I'm sure. But Jordan-Hare is going to be a tough place to play because it's a rivalry game, a true rivalry game in every sense, and because their fans do a good job. So it's going to be up to Georgia to chill things out with a steady run game against an Auburn defense that has been pretty decent against the run. Not unreal, but decent against the run. And they're going to have to hit some balls. Georgia's defense, on the other hand, really should dominate this game, if we're being honest. And that's the thing for Georgia fans to watch. Can you suck the air out of that stadium by playing very good defense and special teams? Because over time, Georgia's offense is going to score. And if they scored last year against this Auburn team, they'll score this year. This is not quite as good a defense as Auburn has had in the past when Gus was there, but they are still, good, adequate. But this is an important moment in the season. These games seem to be getting bigger each week. I mean, when you think about going to the Clemson game, those top 5 clash. UAB, no. Carolina comes to Sanford 2-0, which I'll tell you, a lot of people didn't see happening. And then, you go to Vanderbilt. Of course, that game was a joke. And then the top 10 fight with Arkansas. And now all of a sudden, Auburn has rehabilitated itself. and is a ranked team. So even with the just not great performance these last 2 weeks. So, we'll see. And now Kentucky looms after this game as a very possible top 10 matchup if Kentucky takes care of LSU. So we'll see. But the crowd noise is really a problem at Auburn. That's not overdone. And it's something that we'll talk to you about after the game. We'll see you over on the website.